Hi, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You're listening to Living the Wildlife, discussing all things related to vertebrate pest control as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast for Living the Wildlife Podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Hey, glad to have you on board. I hope your week went well. I am still running like crazy, so unfortunately, I hope you all had a good Memorial Day weekend. I was able to take a little time off and do that, but nevertheless, we're back in the grind again, and so do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel. If you're wondering what Living the Wildlife is all about, well, it's not about partying or getting drunk or that sort of thing. It's about all things related to vertebrate pest control. So we tend to get a little geeky in Living the Wildlife, so we tend to do research-based information on some difficult topics and complex topics that aren't ordinarily discussed in podcasts. So if you're looking for something that's often going to be, well, how do I just simple answers, you're probably not going to get them here. We're going to get some things that are more complex, but we do provide a lot of information on technical information, on information that's often difficult for people to find, and it's often things that you're not going to just simply experience on your own. So a lot of research-based stuff here. Do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. Definitely reach out, tell us how we're doing. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Of course, here's my website. We have a lot of resources here available. Let me just sort of highlight some. Of course, we do personal consultation. I have several books available. One that I'm particularly proud of course, is the Wildlife Damage Inspection Handbook, 3rd edition, and I continue to develop information, so somewhere down the road I'll come out with edition 4 as I continue to gather. It's basically, I drive a lot of information. I keep adding species and then adding more depth on, because if you're not identifying what the cause of the problem is, you're probably wasting a lot of your time and your client's time. So it is a technical book, but it is relatively user-friendly, and I encourage you to take a look at it. I believe I even have a podcast on the Wildlife Damage Inspection Handbook. So definitely check out the materials we have on our site. And of course, I always welcome your comments, suggestions for future shows. You can again reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. All right, enough of all that. This week we're talking about raccoon roundworm. So those of you in the wildlife control sphere know that raccoon roundworm is a serious parasite that can infect people, particularly children, because children are constantly playing in the dirt and then sticking their dirty fingers in their hands. And so raccoons are the primary or a key host is probably the wrong word. Reservoir is probably a better word for raccoons because they can tolerate this particular worm, and they shed it in their feces. Not all the time, but nevertheless, they're the key proponent. Now, a lot of animals carry this roundworm. It's called Baylisascaris procyonis. That's roundworm of the raccoon. But other animals contract this particular parasite and can shed it as well. So even though our focus is going to be on raccoons, they are the primary reservoir. They are not the only reservoir, right? So as I tell people, poo is bad. Don't touch that, right? So be careful. And the concern, of course, is that some children who have contracted this particular infection have died, and some have had severe mental disabilities. And even adults sometimes contract the infection. The worm, depending on how it transfers from the stomach to the bloodstream, if it gets there, it can then fish its way through your body and may come up into your eye area and literally eat its way through your eye, and it can be killed with a laser, or it goes into the brain, or for many of us, it just simply insists itself in some muscle tissue, and we never even know that we were infected. But nevertheless, it is a serious concern, and it's something that's easily preventable, and that's the key. The problem is, of course, is raccoons create these large toilets. So raccoons will create toilets up in attics, they'll create them on roofs, and they'll create them in yards and sandboxes and in V's of trees. I think I even did a podcast on where raccoons typically have their toilets. So it's a problem. So how do you clean that up for a client, especially if a client wants to have it done? Or how would you recommend that the client handle this? Well, this is the podcast we're going to talk about where you get some resources on the kind of advice you would need to give them in that regard. So let me pull up the first document then. And this one is from the CDC. Notice it's in the CDC stacks. So let me pull this link up, of course, and this is what it's called. It's called Raccoon Latrines, Identification and Cleanup. And this is a single-page publication created by the CDC. And you can see the date for it is 2011. So it's pretty recent. There's not a lot of changes and a lot of disease information, right? So it was published in April 14th, 2011. And what you want to do with this is something you can download and store on your company computer so that when you have situations where you encounter this, you can then send this file to your client as some information that can be used. And it's not you saying it, right? It's the CDC. You are simply the vehicle letting them know about this particular resource so that you can help allay some fears. Because one of the problems is it can be pretty scary for people when they have, a massive toilet up in the attic and they're worried about their children, of course, and now how do you handle that? And so this is something that's going to be important for you to be able to give them quality information that's not going to scaremonger, but not just going to say, oh, everything's going to be fine and I'm going to sterilize your facility. I hope you never use the term sterilize, right? So if you get hired to remove a raccoon latrine, you are going to clean the area. You are not going to sterilize it. You are going to improve its sanitary condition, but you are not going to guarantee that you have eliminated all the raccoon roundworm eggs. Be very careful how you phrase things because there's no way you're going to be able to confirm that. Now, all that being said, there are some things to do. So let's highlight them briefly here. And you can read this, of course, for yourself. It's not very long. Single page, bullet points, very quick. The first technique you can use when you're removing raccoon roundworm, of course, your first job is to remove as much of the physical matter as possible without stirring up dust, right? So you don't want to aerosolize those eggs, and so you're going to want to, wet it down. If you wet it down with soapy water, all the better, but then you want to wet it down, and then you want to sort of shovel it up, put it into industrial strength plastic bags, avoiding creating a cloud of dust. And so I don't want to go into all the details here, but think about where that dust could go. So you need to be sure you're quarantining off areas that you're removing that. Some wildlife control operators like to use these large industrial vacuums, and so they don't have to. They will then, punch out the attic vent, for example, so they're not even going through the living space. And then they can suck all this information out, all this material out into these large vacuum cleaners. Now, the concern that I have with that is, are they HEPA, right? Now, the roundworm eggs are pretty large, right? So the problem is I'm always wondering, when you're using a vacuum cleaner, where is that exhaust going, right? Because is there a possibility that you could be aerosolizing eggs into the air? And so that's a question you're going to have to figure out. How fine are the capture bags of your vacuum cleaner? Are you using a HEPA type vac? So clearly these are some questions that I certainly don't know the answer to, and I'm not even sure that the industry has really come to grips with yet. But if you have some additional information, I would love to hear it. Of course, reach out to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear it. Nevertheless, with all the work that's been done, you would think that if these issues were problems, we probably would have heard something by now. But that's cold comfort, right? Because there might be one, right? So you don't want to be the first person where this happens to, right? So you don't want to be cavalier about this situation. So I tend to be a nervous Nelly about this sort of thing, but nevertheless, you want to be sure that you want to think about cross-contamination is something you want to be thinking about. So you're wetting down the droppings just to kind of keep that dust down. Some people even use air scrubbers. You're going to shovel up or gather up that fecal material along with the insulation, put it into industrial plastic bags, tie it up, and you're going to bring all that to the dump. Okay. How do you now clean the attic? Well, you can't use fire. Fire is the number one way to kill raccoon roundworm eggs. The research from the CDC found that the thermal death point for the eggs was, I believe, around 141 degrees. Let me see if I can pull that up here. Thermal death point, Baylisascaris, Procyonis. Just to kind of, here it is. Okay. Publication from the CDC. This was done in 2007 in the journal Emerging Infectious Diseases, Volume 13, Number 1, January 2007. And the thermal death point of Baylisascaris procyonis eggs. And so to make it, sort of bottom line it here for you, it is viable 62 degrees centigrade or 57 degrees centigrade. So we have all larvae remained viable in water up to 47 degrees centigrade. All larvae were viable at 52 and 57. Complete inactivation occurred at 62 degrees centigrade. So let's take a look at what that is in Fahrenheit. So 62, that's 143.6. So let's just say 144 degrees completely inactivates it. Now, you would say, well, that's not very hot. No, it's not. It would be scalding water for us, but it's certainly a lot lower than boiling, right? So if you're using boiling water, and that's pretty hot, that's going to be around 212, 210, because whenever you take it off the stove, of course, the temperature drops immediately, right? So 210 degrees, so that's pretty hot. The problem is you have to remember that when they did this particular test to find the thermal death point for the eggs, they were using pure eggs that didn't have any contamination around it, right? So we don't get access to the pure eggs. Our eggs are going to be embedded in insulation, in soil, in feces material, and so that means you have to get the material around the egg up to 144 degrees, and then to get the egg up to 144 degrees, right? Because that's going to insulate it. So even though the temperature's there, it's going to be a lot more heat. Remember, heat is the measurement of how much energy is involved. The temperature is the measurement of how excited the molecules are, right? So heat and temperature are related, but heat is, when you think of it in terms of volume, and temperature is like intensity, right? So that is the problem with this particular. So when you want to be using significantly higher temperatures to be sure that you can penetrate the insulation that may be protecting those eggs from getting the heat that you're exposing it to. Okay, I hope that's kind of clear. But nevertheless, that's good news. So this is why it's so important to remove as much physical mass or matter of the droppings, because it doesn't matter if you kill the eggs or not. If you remove the eggs, it doesn't matter, right? You don't have to kill them. You're just going to take them out of the house or take them out of the area. The problem is what do you do about the contaminated wood? You may have clients who are saying, well, I don't want my attic wood to have raccoon roundworm eggs on. So what are you going to do? Well, you have a couple of options. One of them is to understand that dryness kills the eggs as well. So that's called desiccation. If the eggs are not in a moist environment, they will dry out, and that will kill them. The problem is we don't know how long it takes to dry them out. What we do know is if they're outdoors in the soil, they can last for decades. However, how long will they last in a dry attic, particularly when attics get pretty hot? Now, to be clear, attics don't get hot enough to reach the thermal death point, but they get hot, and it's a dry heat, right? So if there's no new moisture and there's no new contamination, because I'm assuming you've removed the raccoons and the animals that are in the attic and sealed that up, how long would it be? Well, we don't know, but 10 years? What's the likelihood of the egg surviving for 10 years in a dry environment? Probably not high, right? So, but these are questions we ultimately don't know the answer to. So one of the things is just simply wait. Now, if your client says, no, I need to have greater assurance, well, then what you want to do is, according to the CDC, is you want to be sure that you are taking scalding water to the extent possible. It says here, indoor latrine cleaning. Here are the main points it says. Avoid stirring up dust. We've already talked about that. Do not use a propane torch indoors, right? So, okay, we don't want to start a fire. What they want you to do is fill a bucket with hot soapy water and remove the feces material. We've already mentioned that. Use a damp but not wet sponge to wipe the area. Rinse your sponge frequently in the bucket, and after you have cleaned the area, flush the dirty water down a toilet or something suitable. Place the sponge in a plastic bag and the plastic bag in the garbage. Don't reuse the sponge, right? That should not be. And then further reduce risk of possible infection by thoroughly washing your hands with soap and warm running water. Clean and launder your clothes. Of course, you should be using Tyvek suits and respirators, of course. I mean, always wear your PPE, right? So that is what you're going to do. And so you would wipe down those boards, the rafters, maybe some of the sheetrock, and clean it that way. Now, one of the things that's not mentioned in this particular document is that bleach does not kill raccoon roundworm eggs. So understand that there are no real cleaning agents that are legal that will kill the roundworm eggs. But what bleach does is it does remove that. There's a sticky coating on the eggs that make it adhere to things. And so if you do spray a little bit of bleach, then that can help wash things away. But of course, it's all at the microscopic level, so how well do you know it's going to work or not, right? So, and also be careful, bleach is a pesticide, so make sure you're following whatever guidelines in your state about the application of cleaning agents inside of a building, right? You may need a separate license for that when you're doing it on a commercial basis, so definitely check that out. So clearly, if things inside of a house are going to be a lot more difficult to take care of, but there is solutions. I was in a house once where the raccoon defecated inside of a bathtub. Well, what would the person do? Should they tear out the bathtub and throw it away? No, they don't have to do that. Right? What they can do is simply take scalding water, boiling water, after they've cleaned out as much of the raccoon debris as they can, and then clean the remainder part of it, what if the parts you can't see, using scalding water. Making sure they're not spraying themselves, and just wash all that right down the drain. You have to take out the big material, otherwise it might clog your drain, right? So, but for the microscopic material, you can then clean that. I gotta be careful with the word sterilize, but I think that would be one location where you probably could be pretty sure, because you're getting to that clean environment, and also the tub is non-porous, where wood, of course, is porous, and so you don't know if the eggs are they getting embedded in some of the wood cracks and that sort of thing. That creates its own problem, but tubs can handle a lot more heat. Now, if you're dealing with toilets outside of a house, or toilets that are on top of something like concrete or asphalt, you can flame it, right? So you're going to scrape that material up as much as possible. Remember, if you're dealing with a toilet in soil, you need to collect soil larger than the footprint of the toilet, because rain is going to move through erosion some of those roundworm eggs larger than what the footprint is. So you need to be looking at the gravity of the latrine and where the water may move some of those eggs. And so it's going to require you to pay attention to what you're looking at. Then you're going to dig that out a little bit and kind of scrape that top inch or so of soil away, bag that all up, and then you're going to flame it with a propane weed burner and flame the living daylights out of it. Taking a shovel, turning that material over, flame it some more, turn the material over, flame it some more, and then that's going to be basically going to solve that. Of course, if you're dealing with concrete, you can scrape the raccoon feces up into a industrial bag and then flame the concrete, keeping in mind that you need to have sufficient heat and temperature to kill those eggs. And you got to make sure you're not going to damage the underlying material or cause a fire, right? Particularly some of you may be living in fire country. You want to be very careful about keeping your wits about you. You don't want to create another problem trying to solve the previous problem, right? That's something you certainly want to avoid. So I'm going to certainly suggest that you download this publication. Let me give it to you again. I think everyone in wildlife control, if you are dealing with raccoons, you need to have a kit, a little filing box with each of your service vehicles so that your technician can then hand these things over and say, here, you have this particular, so when they do their inspection, they're going to check off, handed the client, the rabies sheet, handed the client the raccoon latrine sheet, handed the client, maybe the laws of your state or something. And that way, if something bad happens, you can help. It helps protect your company. I'm not a lawyer, but these types of things, you have endeavored to provide information, quality information, government information to your client, right? When I was in business, it was annoying, but, I did kind of get some sort of glee out of it when clients would tell me, oh, the previous guy said I could translocate the animal. And I said, well, they're lying. Either they were lying to you or they were breaking the law. And I would hand them a publication from my state's wildlife agency and said it was on their letterhead. It had their logos on it, their publication. I said, don't believe me. here it is. And I could throw that other company under the bus. Okay. Now, we have to be careful about criticizing our competition, but it really irked me when there were people who would basically lie to their clients or simply break the law. That was unfair. You want to compete with me, but don't lie to your client to win the sale, so to speak. That's just not right. But you may have a different practice, but nevertheless, you need to have this sort of filing box that you have with your clients, or maybe if you're doing everything digitally, that you're able to email that to them or provide them the links saying, here is the information. This helps you get started in this particular direction. And it can really be helpful, solve a lot of questions. And then it's not you're not worried about, well, did my technician give enough information? It's like, here it is, right? This is straight from the experts at the CDC. Now, some of you may be saying, well, but I want to get more information about how I am supposed to clean up these latrines. Well, in that situation, I'm going to suggest that you take a look at a publication that I was involved in, and this is called A Draft Proposal for an Industry Protocol for the Cleanup of Raccoon Latrines. It is a publication you can easily download, doesn't cost anything. This is something that I wrote with another gentleman when I was at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and it was my attempt to try to start a conversation with the wider industry and say, look, we need to create some standardized protocols for how we are going to handle raccoon latrine cleanup. Unfortunately, I was unsuccessful, right? So why? Because a lot of wildlife control operators don't like listening to anyone, and they're like herding cats, and they hate technical information, and they hate rules, and blah, 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 right? So I've been down that road before. You can listen to some of my other podcasts. But it's hurt the industry, in my opinion. And so this is one of the things I envy about the pest control field. They do develop protocols and then share that information so that everyone's on the same page, and I envy them for it, right? They're a little bit more sophisticated, and of course they're a lot wealthier than those of us in the wildlife control field. So hey, you got to give them their due on that. But this is something that you may want to look at and say maybe it'll help you think about how you should go about cleaning up raccoon latrines inside structures. It does talk about dealing with outside of structures, but frankly, I think that's the easy part. The difficult part is dealing with raccoon latrines that are in areas that are fire sensitive or inside of a building. And this is a publication you can download and you can read it. Perhaps you want to adopt it for your own country. Feel free to modify it. It's out there, right? And there you can find it. There are very few Vantassels in the world. You can just look up Vantassel, Vantassel. Let me blow this screen up for you so you can see it a little bit better. Vantassel, raccoon latrines, draft proposal can be your keywords. It'll pop right up. And so, I'd love to have comments on it. If some of you are involved in associations where you're looking to develop these types of or adopt protocols, I would love to participate in getting that out there into the wider industry, because I think it's important, and it also it moves the industry forward and protects the industry and reduces liability. Lawyers haven't completely discovered our industry yet. They will, and they're starting to, right? I've been asked to be an expert, provide expert information for a few cases. Only one of them went to trial is the wrong word. It was more mediation, I guess is the right word there, mediation. And so it can happen, right? And so these are things that you're going to have to sort of keep in mind, that sooner or later it's going to affect us. And why don't we work together to try to reduce that? Because your client really doesn't want to go down to the lawsuit route, right? And neither do you. Why don't we do things the right way and protect everyone and clients in the industry for the betterment of everybody, right? So, yeah, I know it's not sexy. I know it's not going to make you a ton of money, but it's important. Well, I hope you found this information helpful. I do want to encourage you to develop that kit of that filing kit for your technicians or for yourself, that you have literature ready at the hand to give the clients when you encounter some of these patients. This should certainly be one of them. Another one, of course, is going to be rabies. I'll probably have to do a podcast on the number of handouts that I think you should have available, and maybe do a spotlight on that. But this is certainly one that you should have. Not this one, not the draft proposal. Let me go back to the CDC one. This is the one you should have. The other one's for professionals, not for the homeowners. But if you don't do the kind of work, if you don't want to get involved in raccoon latrine cleanup, maybe you want to hand them the draft proposal, at least say, here's a starting point, something to think about, and move forward in that direction. Well, you've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Thank you so much for attending. Would love to hear from you. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear your comments and thoughts, suggestions for future shows. And do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. We'd love to maybe even provide some review comments on the show. Would love to get that. That can help us with the algorithms, of course. If you don't like YouTube, you can certainly download my podcast through Rumble, which I publish there as well. Again, this is Living the Wildlife. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.